tragedy strikes, how does he react?
The only way he could deal was to transform himself into this alternative figure.
Batman has always been a fascination to me because of the serious origins.
Who is Batman? Who is Bruce Wayne?
He's a fascinating character. Fascinating.
He's a myth. He's a character. He's bigger than life.
But like all myths, it has a relevance to our daily lives, or we wouldn't still be fascinated by it.
That's what audiences find so fascinating about him, is that backstory, how he came to be.
This thing that really messed him up as a little kid empowers him, and he uses his wealth.
He's incredibly rich, which is how we can get all those toys.
He is a philanthropist.
And he learned, martial arts, he learned philosophy.
And he goes through great sacrifice to protect us all.
He has suffered in his life unreasonably because his parents were taken from him when he was a kid.
And he made a vow, and he never grew up. He's really that child in a way.
He was unable to ever, to keep that from happening. So he has this sort of drive to make himself perfect, to make sure he's never in a position where he's helpless again.
And he's used that as an inspiration.
And instead of letting it crush him, he turns himself into this avenging angel who wants to heal the world.
He doesn't want revenge on the whole world. He wants to make the world right so that other people don't have to suffer the way that he suffered.
And there's so many different ways to tell the stories.
You can change a lot of things, but there are certain base things about certain superheroes that they got right.
The fact that he has no superpowers, he didn't come here from Krypton. He's a man who got burned by life.
He's human, and you can kill him. And so that makes him a much more interesting character.
It's not about superpowers. It's about the tragedy of his childhood. It's about the heroicism of his life, overcoming pain and heartache.
Even though he's real, it is a superhero kind of show. We have fantastic villains.
He will not kill for any reason whatsoever.
It's open to different interpretations, and I think that's okay. But I like the Batman that doesn't kill, even though in some of my books are, I'm killing them right and left because they're not Batman.
So he takes people to jail if they need to be jailed. He takes people to the asylum if they need to be looked after, but he's not there to punish them.
It's either rehabilitation or life in prison.
You look at these characters and you see a guy who's trying to help other people who are really bad shape, and yet he himself is not in a great place. He's just in a better place. And he's a good human being in spite of all of it.
He has his issues. He has his memories and things that motivate him, and he probably needs to see a shrink.
Batman's a mess. He's a mess, But the people he deals with, he's somebody that's found his center. And these people are a lot more unbalanced than Batman.
And he locks them away to stop them from being a further nuisance, but also, so they can get help.
That's what people love so much about him. It's a redemption story.
The Batman character is just one that I think has so much depth to him.
And I liked Batman because when I was a kid, I thought I could be Batman. I can't be Superman. I found out I couldn't be Batman either.
Every little kid throws a towel on it, and wraps it around his neck and runs around pretending to be a comic book hero and all.
My mom made me a Batman suit, and I had the little ears, and she put cardboard in it, and I looked a little bit like an angry German Shepherd, It's like, and my nephew had a Robin outfit, and we thought, well, we'll solve crime in Mount Enterprise. Well, in Mount Enterprise, where I lived at that time, there were about 150 people. And I remember going to bed one night and getting the next morning and found out the bank was robbed. And I said, well, I'll be damned. I didn't get a bat signal. I didn't get nothing. I'm out. I'm not a crime fighter.
Kids want to be a hero like him. They want to be the guy that saves the day. And I think it carries on into adulthood.
He was the adult in the room. That was my favorite version of Batman.
My favorite Batman up until that point was Frank Miller's. You read The Dark Knight and it's like your brain explodes. Oh my God, I didn't know comics could be this way.
Seeing this, the more serious version in the comics, that was a real revelation.
Batman has to live with the fact that, who am I to be talking about obeying the law? Because I'm not. I'm a vigilante. We still root for him because his motives are right. The police, what he does is where the police can't fill in. And they can't, and the police can't even acknowledge him.
Commissioner Gordon is friends with the Batman. The police are not.
Batman will not get involved in something where the police can handle it.
Commissioner Gordon, for some reason, is willing to give Batman the benefit of the doubt, and Bullock is like, no, he's a criminal.
The character of Bullock is great. I tell you, that guy's we're going to bring Batman in. And I think it's always best when you have a hero like Batman's Creature of the Night, is make everybody after him.
It's like having a vigilante showing you up is bad press.
It's not just the criminals that are after him. The police are after him. The FBI are after him. The press hates him. You know, everybody thinks this guy is evil. And really, we in the audience know, no, he's the guy that's keeping you safe.
Batman would be in an alleyway and Commissioner Gordon would go over and talk to him. And I thought that dialogue, and how you could stage it where, Gordon has his back to him and no one else knows the Batman's there. It's kind of mysterious. And it's like that was like a really great element that I loved.
So it adds conflict. It adds a real interesting point of view. And I think that's really the reason, that's one reason Batman is an enduring character, because he sort of stands for that complexity in our life, that dual nature in our society.
Who is using every one of his resources to make the world a better place.
That the weakest among us must be helped by the strongest.
It may not be true in real life, but that's how it should be.
We all had seen the previous Batman series that have existed.
The movies, the serials.
The Adam West series that Bruce Timm and I both loved when we were kids.
Absolutely. That was appointment after school television for me.
It was real to me as a kid. I didn't understand why people were laughing.
Everyone I know at Warner Brothers and in the business, from Bruce Timm to anybody, loves that version of Batman, the 60s Batman.
One of the things that started happening is if you had a date in college at Friday night, everybody gathered around a TV and watched Batman together.
Very campy, kind of funny, kind of silly, pow, zap, smash.
They knew what they were doing was a campy kids show version of Batman. But there's a place for farce and there's a place for that kind of theater.
We wanted to distance ourselves from that as much as possible.
Definitely not what we were driving at with Batman the Animated Series.
Bruce Timm said, "What do you know about Batman?" And I said, "Well, I know the Adam West show from when I was a kid." And he said, No, that's not what we're doing. He said, "We all love Adam. We love Adam West, but that is not what we're doing."
I was at Warner Brothers for the first time back in the early 80s when we stumbled upon or came upon the old Max Fleischer Superman cartoons. And that to me was just mind-blowing. I just thought they were so fabulous.
I remember the first time I saw the Fleischer cartoons was at a convention when I was 14, the World Science Fiction Convention. And it was at a booth, somebody was selling them in 16 millimeter. And what is this? What is this? And I remember thinking back then, boy, it would have been so cool if the Fleischers had done Batman.
A few years later, I was at Hanna-Barbera working with Alan Burnett. We were doing Super Friends, which is not so good.
A bunch of very stentorian voiced superheroes standing there and, "Hey, Wonder Woman, you should chase that guy." "I will go chase him."
It was an unintentionally funny show, but we used to enjoy it for what it was.
They were always gathered for meetings, which I always thought they must hate those meetings.
So you have a character who wants to drain Earth's oceans. Oh my God, you're going to kill all life. And it turns out at the end, well, he did it because his planet has no water. Oh, well, let's go help him get some water and then go help the guy. So it's like here comes the sob story. So
I actually like Super Friends. I know the production values were limited because we had so little money in those days to do animation, and we had so little money to do anything, actually.
We were doing Super Friends, and Alan and I talked about spinning Batman out and doing a Batman series that would be serious and dark.
I mean, there were action adventure shows like He-Man, G.I. Joe. Starcom, which I worked on, was pretty much a straight up action adventure show in outer space. Done very, the attempt was to be very serious.
Fortunately, actually, looking back on it, we didn't sell it because we wouldn't have been able to get away with everything that we got away with in the 90s. This was back in the early 80s.
I was actually working over at Disney Feature when the Tim Burton Batman came out.
That was the inspiration for getting the series made in the first place, was that we had this incredible movie coming out that was a whole new vision of Batman, and how did we want to continue to carry that forward?
Stylistically, they're wonderful.
There wouldn't have been an animated series if the Tim Burton films hadn't been such a huge success.
There was certainly a moment when I went, gulp, you're following Danny DeVito.
Warner Brothers saw the potential, the merchandising and everything.
65 commercials to sell all this Batman stuff. So
they decided to do a companion, in animation. They said, well, now that Batman's hot, why don't we also do a cartoon series?
We can't say this is inspired by Tim's stuff and Tim never saw any of it.
So one. Two, Tim Burton is an animator. Oh, the guy that directed the movie, he knows animation. Let's get him to say.
Bruce and I were requested, not by Tim, but by Warner Brothers, to go to Tim at his place on the set of the Batman 2.
Yes, it was a cursory kind of thing.
And we thought, oh no, we're already in production. This is a really bad idea. But Gene let us know. It's like, guys, we need to make a formal presentation.
He was very supportive of it. And as an artist himself, I think he recognized how terrific the art was.
And to our absolute delight and pleasure, he went, yeah, this looks great. Literally.
While we were benefiting greatly from the success of the Batman feature films, we wanted to cut our own trail.
The Batman that we did wasn't based at all on the Batman that was done by Tim Burton.
It's more atmosphere and emotion than it was anything directly.
And it did affect me later on in Bruce because, the Penguin design had to be changed. Catwoman design had to be changed. Things that had to tie into the second Batman film. And I think that's a small price to pay.
But all that really did was just inform us of the style. Tim Burton's style for Batman was just terrific.
I don't think it was the only influence, but I think it was a big influence. I think Bruce Tim was able to take that and marry it to those old Fleischer style cartoon, the way those looked, and add in his own take, which looked a little bit like the 50s comic books that I grew up reading.
It just opened up the gates for a new Batman.
Who are you? I'm your worst nightmare.
Jamie Kellner, who was such an interesting businessman. He was a really forward-thinking businessman. He doesn't get a lot of notice or attention, but he should be credited with a lot of successes that we had from a business perspective. If we could make a deal with Warner Brothers and get some of their key properties that they could pay for the programming, and it would reduce our investment costs, and I would get some big brands.
I was very close with, personally and professionally, with Margaret Lesh, the head of Fox Kids.
Oh, Gene McCurdy's a wonderful longtime friend.
And that's where it was being broadcast. I was having fun. And, they charged me with setting up the television division at Warner Brothers, which was, at the time, a huge job.
Warner Brothers, by the way, was not the Warner Brothers lot. Warner Brothers was a bank in Sherman Oaks where they had all the animation offices.
Warner Brothers hadn't done animation for quite a while.
So when Tiny Toons was started, Spielberg wanted to have a studio, Warner Brothers studio, and bring it back. And so that happened because of Spielberg.
I think that they had so much success with animation, with the new animation division that they were forming, that they wanted to expand.
They did have a department that did commercials.
But it was a very small group. We went from 15 to 150 people within about 3 months. So it was a huge push, and it was exciting.
Jamie knew that I was a fan of some of the Warner Brothers properties, like Batman.
She was definitely the one who had the guts to say, no, we can do this in a more sophisticated way than Super Friends or anything that came before.
We really wanted to do Batman. We both did. Gene and I both wanted to do Batman.
The other 5 projects that were there were all comedy based.
And Gene and I both wanted to do Tasmania. And I also wanted Tiny Toons.
I was the producer on Tiny Toons, and I was writing lots of stuff and producing those and seeing those through post. And same thing with Animaniacs.
So we ended up working out a deal where for a certain amount of years, we got the properties, and Steven Spielberg at around this same time had been pitching an idea I think he and Tom Ruegger had worked on it, and that's Animaniacs, which of course we love. So that Animaniacs was folded into the deal.
Gene McCurdy and Tom Ruegger really had this bug where they really wanted to do a Fleischer-style cartoon. And of course, only Batman could be that.
Bruce had done a page of character designs, and with my couple backgrounds, we submitted that artwork. And that was how Gene, saw the style and thought, well, this is interesting. Let's maybe pursue the Batman thing as an action show.
To Fox's credit, they really wanted that. They really wanted a show that had real peril.
That series would not have happened in any form that we know it if it hadn't been for Fox Kids, for Karen Barnes, and absolutely positively for Sidney I. Warner. I mean, he shepherded the series.
Two of our biggest successes, X-Men and Batman.
And he's the reason the show turned out to be the great show that it is. He's the unsung hero.
Oh, yes. Sidney was on my team. Sidney was one of my program executives.
Sidney was with the network. So Alan was the day-to-day. And remember, Sidney would give notes. Sidney wouldn't sit in a story meeting. We'd send a script and he'd come back and say, well, we can do this, we do that. But I'm sure Alan probably talked to Sidney a lot about stories we wanted to do. So I wouldn't underestimate Sidney's role.
Alan Burnett, once we were talking about Sidney, and he says, every great writer in the business respects and loves Sidney. Every mediocre writer can't stand him.
Gene McCurdy said, let's do Batman. I mean, the front office wanted it. Warner Brothers was loaded at that moment. They had a lot of Batman money from the movies. They saw the success of Tiny Toons and they realized, hey, we've got a unit of accomplished artists and animators and writers who could make a good Batman show. So they told McCurdy, let's explore this.
Jamie first approached me. How would you like to have Batman? What if we did this overall deal with Warner Brothers? And very quickly it escalated to where Gene and I were talking about the creative.
The great thing about Batman was nobody had seen anything like it before. And so it took a lot of people aback.
That's not what was allowed by any network, not since Johnny Quest.
It's not something like that hadn't been done before a bit, but Johnny Quest, that was a big deal.
I think that the glue that tied everything together was Bruce and Eric.
So at first, Bruce and Eric were handling all the production angles and they were getting some stories underway.
Bruce and I were complete novices to being in producing roles, so we were learning what producers were as we were producing.
The executives at Fox were questioning that. They were wondering if Bruce and Eric could handle all the aspects.
Out of this relationship between me and Gene and Jamie's relationship with Warner Brothers, the one he built, we were able to come together with this terrific deal. And we ended up, Fox, being the beneficiary of getting some excellent shows that we didn't pay for. Warner Brothers put a lot of money into them. We shared with them advertising time.
Fox was pretty good to us. They didn't mess with us too much.
And then, of course, it also had to go through the higher ups. It had to go through Gene McCurdy and Tom Ruegger.
No, I loved it. I mean, I loved it from the beginning. I was a good, passionate champion for the show, I think.
When I was around and available, Gene would call me into the Batman meetings. And when she couldn't do them, I would do them. And basically, it was just to keep up with what was going on. And we would occasionally take calls from Fox when Fox was unhappy with maybe the way a story was going.
The suits would say, oh my God, it's so dark. And then you'd go, yes, that's the whole point. So it was that kind of a balance.
I mean, we were working on Batman in the early 90s, and that was when Batman was in the post-Killing Joke era where everything was dystopian, and dark, and Batman was sort of like this neurotic, angst-filled teenager.
We didn't have Robin there at the beginning. We wanted this solo hero, kind of a loner for sure.
If you see Batman, if you actually see him, you're in big trouble.
They basically asked us, Gene specifically, if we would put together some sort of presentation. And I think Bruce and I just both said, why don't we do a piece of animation? Because that's the only way you're really going to get a sense of how this might play.
To present to Fox Television and say, hey, look, here's this TV series, and we're prepared to make this thing if you're prepared to buy it.
They produced a sizzle reel.
The best way would be to showcase Gotham City, just the mysterious factor and the vigilante factor of Batman.
And this was the sales pitch.
Tim Sarnoff was the vice president of production, so he ran the budget and schedule, reported to Gene. Went in, talked with him, gave him a general idea of what we thought we were going to need, because I got an estimate from the studio, somewhere in the range of about $90,000, and that's all in.
Eric promoted the idea that we would be a good studio to execute this idea. And in hand, he had these Zeller's Batman commercials that we've done. So we'd done a Batman, right?
Done in Canada, which, it's not Korea, if we had done the same thing in Korea at that time, it would have probably been half that cost.
And whatever channels he had to go through to make it happen, he did.
Greg Duffel was the artist.
There was no management hierarchy to any great extent. They've been given this little job to do, or this project to start fleshing out, and they were doing it.
There was literally no digital assist. All the effects were hand done. So 90,000 is a drop in the bucket these days.
I woke up in a start, and I looked over at the clock, and it was at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I go, like Batman, I got to go to work.
Batman owes a incredible debt of gratitude to him and his studio, because he took it on and he knew what we wanted to do, and he had the facility to do it.
And everybody was wowed by it.
That had made its way all around the industry. It was like everybody was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
It's a thing of beauty. It's a thing of beauty.
It wasn't lame. It was like, oh my God, this is so cool. The timing was crisp. The drawing was beautiful.
From that moment I saw that, I was like, oh my God, these guys are doing a serious Fleischer Brothers style Batman. I have to be on board. I have to be on this show.
And you think, I could have done a much better job on this if we'd just been given some time, and I wouldn't have charged a penny more.
I think one conversation with Margaret Lesh at Fox Kids, and it was sold.
Gene and I got on the phone, agreed to what we wanted to do, and boom, we got the deal done.
And I said, well, how did it all go? He goes, we sold the show. He says, but we never had to show the video. They sold the thing with a video sight unseen.
They ended up buying 65 episodes right out of the gate.
And then we realized, well, now we've got to make this thing.
And Batman was an entirely different show with entirely different goals.
We set out to do a drama.
And we're going to make it really dramatic. We're going to push the envelope on it dramatic. We're going to have parents writing us letters about, wait, this isn't for kids, this is too dramatic.
So many of them, there are these sort of mind trips that the different characters go on. That was never for kids.
There was a lot of concern about how dark it was. There was a lot of concern about how adult it was.
It's absolutely gorgeous.
Dark and mysterious.
It's got the pacing of a 30s movie.
So it was trying to not only explain why we felt that was important, but defend it.
But you know what happens in our business? Once something becomes a hit, the criticism stops.
Focus, focus, focus.
We started on Batman in like 90.
Well, when we started Fox Kids, that was in 1990.
That audition was in 1991.
Boy, these are names I haven't uttered in 20 years.
This is 30 years ago, you understand.
We knew we had something special. We knew it.
They didn't know that it was going to work. They didn't know Batman was going to be, in 30 years, the template by which all dramatic animated series is measured.
Okay, here's the story.
I heard from Brad Rader, who I had worked with.
Bruce was already well aware of Kevin.
And he told me that they were doing a cool version of Batman over at the new Warner Brothers animation that was formed.
How this worked out is I kind of knew Bruce from Deke. I worked on Ghostbusters. He worked on some stuff there. And I had worked with Kevin Altieri for years.
I was a New York theater actor who happened to be in LA doing a pilot for a series.
I was booked by my agent to go in and do some incidental voices on that particular episode. Okay, that was Pretty Poison.
He said, it's animated. And I said, oh man, I don't know anything about animation.
And a really wonderful casting director who's a friend of Andrea's who worked in the theater in New York, said, you should look at Kevin Conroy. He's a good classically trained actor, and you're doing a heroic role.
Gene and I were executive producers on the show. Gene McCurdy, who ran Warner Brothers Animation, and I had met at Hanna-Barbera, and we had gone over to Warner Brothers. She brought me over to do Tiny Toons.
Tom was a busy guy at that time because Tom was running Tiny Toons.
And with that success, she kept giving me things to do.
Tom was the head of Warner Animation, the creative side.
Chief Creative Officer of Warner Brothers Animation. And I don't really know what that means, but I tended to get dragged into meetings now and then.
Gene ran the business side of it, Gene McCurdy.
I was the one who tried to bridge the gap between the people doing the drawing and all that, and the suits at the studio. The money guys, the big bosses, trying to keep them happy, or the network. And it's not that they always had horrible ideas or unrealistic concerns, but it was trying to figure out what their concern was and translate it back to the people on staff.
And I walked in and I had no idea, unbeknownst to me, whatever actress they had chosen to play Poison Ivy was either unable to do it, was sick, or the producers didn't like her performance as much as they thought they would. And so here we were to record the first thing. And Andrea said to me, Romano said to me, do you think you can do this? Would you like to audition for it? And I said, oh, sure. Because of course, every actor says yes right away.
I didn't even know it had never been an animated show. That's how naive I was.
I had no idea. None. I didn't read the comics. I had no idea who Poison Ivy was.
I was not a big comic book reader as a kid.
He said, didn't you ever read the comic books when you were a kid? And I said, no, I never did. He said, what kind of childhood did you have? He loves telling people that story. He said, can you believe this guy never read comic books when he was a kid? What's the matter with him?
And I went up there and it was lunchtime and everybody was gone, including the receptionist. So I just went down to the producers. Barbara Simon was there. I went down to the producer's office and I just laid my script right on her desk so that when she came back from lunch, it was like sitting right there.
So I went over and I met them. I had no idea what I was getting into. I'd never done an animated voice. I'd never auditioned for an animated voice.
At the same time we were making Batman, we were making Tiny Toon adventure episodes, and we were starting to develop Animaniacs.
So I was thinking, oh yeah, right, this will be another goofy version of Batman, just what we need.
So I get a phone call from Kevin. Hey, Dan, how'd you like to work on Batman? I'm like, yes, yes, I do.
I mean, I really owe my entire career to Sydney and to Margaret too for letting me do it while I was an employee of Fox Kids Network, which I don't think you can get away with doing anything like that nowadays.
What I recall was just that they went, would you like to write for this series? Yeah.
They give me the script. They did show me what she looked like. And I went, oh, a kind of a sexy Tinkerbell, right? Because that's how she looks. Tinkerbell with hormones, I like to say.
I never really felt he looked like me, but then again, I'm just not that handsome.
And Andrea Romano had for 5 months been casting this show. They couldn't find the right person.
And then she gets on the phone. She goes, Randy, man, she knows my name. That's a good sign. I read your script. I loved it. And I gave it to the producer of the show who's coming in. That was Alan at the time. And she said, and he liked it and he wants to meet you.
And I said, well, you're telling the Hamlet story. I said, that's Hamlet. And he laughed. He looked at Andre. He said, well, no one's made that comparison. That's a new one in our audition.
I have a friend that worked at DC and his name was Bob Wayne. And he was the one who first showed me this opening to Batman, the dun-dun, and all that. And I said, man, that's fantastic. So I love to work something like that. And then I just went home, and then later DC called me up and said, would you like to do this? And I'm sure Bob, I know Bob put a bug in their ear about it.
I went, okay, yeah, all right. I do my cosmetic voice, which I had earned lots of money doing my cosmetic voice, okay? And then, but however, she's a PhD. Oh, so she has brains. So my cosmetic voice with a little edge to it because she can think.
And I said, well, let me just use my imagination and see what happens. So I just put myself in the head of that child who sees that happen, and what kind of a man would that develop into? And I went to this dark, husky place.
It worked out well for everyone. Fox liked having someone that they knew writing for their shows, and the studios liked having someone who had the network's ear and could get things approved writing for their shows. So it was kind of a win-win in that situation.
So I grabbed whatever I had portfolio-wise, and I brought that to show Bruce. And Bruce went through it. Well, I really need a character designer. Okay, I'll do that. You know, I wanted to be a board artist, but fine, I'll do character designs.
And every day after school, it came on, and we'd all sit on the couch, my wife, my kids, and me, and we'd watch Batman. Hot damn, you know, I really enjoyed it already. I mean, I thought it was great. But when they asked me to do it, I was really excited. And my kids, I was their hero for a little while.
Walking into a Hollywood audition for the one superhero who is not a superhero.
And he said, I like this script. I'm going to buy it.
Like at the end of that first meeting, Bruce handed me a script.
They hired me on the spot. They said, that's it. That's the sound. That's the character.
And I auditioned and they went, you got the job.
And when I need you, I'll call.
Bruce and Eric had done the promo, and then they staffed up.
So there were 3 or 4, basically, I call them units, but teams. Kevin Altieri had his own team with storyboard artists and designers.
I was actually the first director to be hired.
Oh, Kevin's the best. Kevin's the freaking best.
Kevin is possibly my favorite director that I've worked with throughout my career. I've worked with him multiple times, and it's always, well, not always, but usually a really good experience.
Yeah, actually, I did work with Kevin the most because he, you know, we were friends for years already. And so we were fairly tight.
This is Batman. It's like, and I get to do Batman.
Is he Mr. Cool, surfer, biker, and an unbelievably good artist?
He bonded with the Batman series that it became very much probably the most of all the directors.
There was Boyd Kirkland, Frank Parr.
Boyd Kirkland I really liked. Yeah, I worked with Boyd a lot.
At Fox, we kind of had a bias toward the Dick Sebast episodes. We just thought that he really directed very, very well.
We all have similar influences, but we have different approaches, and each show had its own kind of style.
But keep in mind, the designs were often coming from Bruce, and the backgrounds often coming from Eric.
You visualize these things that will make the audience, you know, feel and live the moment.
Really, the directors had their hands full just creating these cinematic storyboards, which were a ton of work.
The storyboards are beautiful. I mean, they're works of art.
There was an overall look and overall mandate. But if you look at each individual show, they all have their own personalities and their own quirks.
Kevin Altieri's work, by far, I mean, just brilliant.
Most directors at least do some, generally do some cleanup, and sometimes will restage things.
And that was a lot of work to oversee, not only storyboarding, but all the layouts, which was like key animation poses, basically, the placement of the characters. It's really important.
It's one of the first times, one of the few times that you really get to exercise your individual style as a director.
Hey, you want to take extra time to plus the stories? Have fun.
Batman is why I'm a writer.
People tend to overlook how well written the show is. The scripts were just remarkable.
I have enough trouble approaching one character and figuring it out, but they'll have half a dozen in their head at the same time, orchestrating them.
You know, I was always watching the episodes. They brought in the best writers. They had the best artists. They had the best stories.
If you don't have a good story, and mix that also with great dialogue and great performances and actors, you're going to fall short no matter how good it looks.
And the real issue at the beginning was the stories.
It was never really aimed at kids as a show. The characters are way too complicated. The stories are complicated. The psychodrama.
You know, you have these psychodramas where you have these characters who have all these psychological maladies, people like, the Riddler, Harley, or whoever.
In the beginning, these are villains that all are rooted in the natural world.
When you write stuff, you're supposed to be honest. You're supposed to be writing about real things, even if you're writing about Batman.
The team they had hired wasn't quite getting it.
And they were kind of doing a childish Batman, like a little kid's Batman.
It was not going in a good direction initially.
They were kind of like theme villains where it's like, well, the cat's eye diamond is in town. I wonder who's going to try and steal that.
The scripts were used because we really had no choice. We had to keep things cooking.
I know Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski had had a much grander vision.
I was certainly trying to stay on top of where we stood with regard to the schedule and making sure that we were going to meet the demands.
You would get the green light, sometimes as late as January, and you had to have 65 episodes in the can by September.
And one of the very first story meetings we got together, it was an all-day thing. We're all around the table, we had a tape recorder on, people recording, and everybody was throwing ideas. And Tom was at that meeting, and he was throwing out lots and lots of ideas.
Tom was obviously very involved in the early stages. He wrote a couple of the earlier episodes, the ones that actually were working.
Which wasn't the plan, but we were behind and we had to get going.
If the show doesn't show up on time, you're losing money.
There were air dates that had to be met, so you couldn't really stop the moving train.
One show doesn't make it, then another show has to be done so that the schedule is filled.
You've got new shows being written and conceived, and you've got shows in edit that are being finalized, and everything in between.
Yeah, it was crazy. That's why you would have multiple story editors and multiple writing teams, and it was just chaos.
At that point, Gene McCurdy said, Tom, help organize some of the writing.
There's a thing called a Bible, which I think probably Tom worked on too.
I rewrote a Bible.
What the environment is, the kind of stories you want to do. It gives you the tone of the show and that way, there's a guy named Commissioner Gordon. There's a girl named Barbara Gordon. And it tells you who they are.
Sidney's a purist, very, very creative, and he wants excellence, and he's not very tolerant of anything less than excellence.
And he was the one who fairly demanded that they bring in Alan Burnett,
who had worked on some of the Super Friends from the Hanna-Barbera days and knew that he didn't want to do that again.
Alan Burnett is the godfather of Batman. Batman is what it is because of Alan Burnett. Now, Bruce Timm's artwork is seminal too. I think on that side, he's the godfather, and certainly with Eric too. Eric moved on to Marvel. But in terms of the stories and putting the staff together and running the whole thing, what are the characters? What are the animation? Where does it fit? Alan, and he interfaced with DC, he interfaced with Warner Brothers. It was his vision, it was his watch, and all of the story, everything went through Alan, and he was just like Mr. Zen, Mr. Cool. And I look back, I was talking, I said, you must be pretty proud. Because he doesn't because he's produced so many shows, and he's very modest about it, very humble.
Alan Burnett and Paul Dini, who are truly experts in Batman. If I ever went astray, they would bring me back to the right path. Once Alan and Paul were in place, the writing just took off and it became fantastic. And Bruce and Eric were delighted. The network was delighted. Everybody was happy.
But yeah, you would have to change the scripts quite often because there would always be that discussion of like, we cannot afford to do this.
No, that never happened to me. Every script I wrote was perfect. No, you have story editors too.
They themselves, because of the preferences they had for the kind of stories they wanted to tell, inherently made the series have a variety of stories from the get-go.
Michael Reeves, who was my editor, who is an amazing editor, I'd always feel like he never gets the credit he deserves because he shaped that show so wonderfully. I know he shaped the things I worked on just because we had the same interest.
I was kind of close with Martin Pasco because he was a comics writer and I wanted to break into comics.
There were some changes, of course. I mean, nothing comes out just like it is. I mean, you got a bunch of guys on the other end with some paint and they interpret things differently. But you know what? They were kind to me. And I think that it was one of those wonderful experiences where they really said, you know what? This guy's written a good script. We're going to be kind to that script.
I changed the living hell out of Feet of Clay Part 2. And Marv Wolfman was like, oh man, I love what you did with the show. That's great. That's a great idea.
So the first one was with Marty. The second one was with Michael Reeves. And the third one was Paul Dini. And each of them was a unique episode, and each of them had a unique kind of tone.
I wasn't like a consistent writer for Batman. I wasn't working every week on an episode or something like that. They just came to me when they had something they thought that would suit my personality.
I was sort of the gang writer there, for everybody, and they just had me working one script after the other, which was great. And then Alan would bring me in and go, "No, this is bad. This is terrible. This is awful."
I want to work with villains who help us understand Batman better.
I sort of brought what I thought of was a '60s detective comic mentality to a sort of '50s vibe, and it really also had a '40s vibe.
I wasn't even in the union. When they found out I wasn't in the union, they freaked, man. They said, "You got to get in the union right now. We're getting in trouble."
On Leather Wings, which was our first to air in the primetime slot.
We started talking about a primetime airing and trying to do all the bells and whistles to get it the attention that I thought it deserved.
Yeah, they ran it for a quarter. Fox did, and on Sunday nights at 7:00, up against 60 Minutes. It didn't do very well, but it was on in prime time.
We were trying to get more exposure, more ratings, a larger audience, and it was a good promotional strategy.
One of my favorite episodes.
I did clean up on the Man-Bat show. I did the transformation sequence.
It started out very encouraging with On Leather Wings. It felt like that pretty much was working.
Yeah, well, I thought one of the reasons it was chosen as the first one was because actually it was like an unfamiliar character.
Man-Bat. Whatever the reasons were, it was like Man-Bat was first.
The answer to that question is quality. Quality, because you want to put your best foot forward.
You take your best shows and put them up front so that you get people hooked into the show and into the series, so that if you have a clunker, they kind of forgive you.
On Leather Wings was the most gorgeous episode we had at the time of our premiere.
I think he likes bats better than people.
I can't imagine.
Everything that is Batman is in it.
I was nuts about it. I mean, it's visually stunning. It's beautiful. It's a character that we hadn't seen before in animation.
As an introduction to all of the characters, the essential characters, that one really covered it.
The one aspect the network wasn't entirely comfortable with was the Batman was being treated too much as a vigilante.
I want my own tactical squad for the sole purpose of throwing the net over this Batman.
Commissioner, I've already denied the request. Nobody's taking a vigilante force onto my streets.
Your Honor, any nutcase that dresses up like a bat sooner or later is gonna snap.
He wasn't as sanctioned by Commissioner Gordon in that episode, and you can still see traces of that, but it was even more like the police are chasing him, at least in one iteration of it.
Just make sure the DA's office can give me an airtight case, sir.
If you catch him, Harvey, I'll put him in jail for you.
Gotham police declare war on Batman.
So that was one thing they dialed back on.
But the third act of that episode, with the dirigibles in the sky over Gotham, I mean, talk about a brilliant and unusual and unique set piece. That was we were going for third act set pieces in a lot of the episodes where something big and extravagant and expensive would be produced.
It's the reveal of the Batcave. It's the reveal of how secretly he gets in and out of the Batcave, which is a direct swipe from Bulleteers by the Fleischer brothers. I always loved that drawbridge that the Bulleteers car comes out of.
And they did all these little things that told you were watching something that was as sophisticated as a 1940s Bob Clampett cartoon.
One instance I'll say that I did where Kirk Langstrom is walking over and talking to Batman. He says, he's really quite brilliant. My God, Mark Singer.
I was looking to him to guide me. It just shows you that we're all brothers and sisters under the skin.
The Beastmaster. I got to meet the Beastmaster.
It's a funny thing, the Beastmaster. One day you're walking along the street like anybody else, and the next day you're the Lone Ranger.
It's like you could have staged that with him just standing on one side of the room and do some rapid cutting back and forth. But it's much more enjoyable, I think, that he walks.
And you're seeing them through a series of beakers and colanders and things, and they're all being distorted as they walk. It's like, okay, they're putting all the extra oomph into this.
You're just making things interesting.
That episode features something that we never see ever again. After the fight, Batman has a little trickle of blood down here. Now, we're not doing that again.
If we had had a different episode that was equally gorgeous and dynamic and brilliant, it would have been a tough choice, but it wasn't.
Jingle bells, Batman smelt, Robin laid an egg. The Batmobile lost the wheel, and the Joker got away.
Christmas with the Joker was, of course, much goofier.
No one had seen a script. So it came into the network as a storyboard.
Crashing through the roof in a one-horse open tree. Busting out I go, laughing all the way.
And the network went ballistic because the original story for Christmas with the Joker was that he kidnapped a random family and held the random family hostage, including the kids.
Rumor has it, Christmas is a time to share with family. And since I don't have one of my own, I decided to steal one.
The network says, we cannot do that. And Warner Brothers is like, yeah, but we're already so far down the line in the production of this. So they came to the compromises. Well, what if they kidnap, the authority figures? What if they kidnap Commissioner Gordon and Bullock?
But that atmosphere of that is much different than Man-Bat.
It's never easy with the Joker.
After that, the episodes were just not hitting the mark. They were either too violent, they were too dark,
preachy, a little bit too many lessons, a little bit too Saturday morning in that sense.
I think at the network, we couldn't describe it either as what it was that felt like, the Goldilocks version of Batman. And in a sense, they redeveloped it to say, okay, it's more about Batman helping people who need help. That's when you got episodes more like I've got Batman in my basement. Basically they were throwing stuff at a wall and just seeing what stuck.
What am I doing? I'm not old enough to drive.
And it still wasn't working. And it really wasn't until Paul Dini did Heart of Ice.
Paul's a great story guy.
I've been friends with Paul for over 40 years. I mean, we are real tight. I love him like a brother.
Paul Dini, you could always talk to him. Oh, wait, I got an idea. Can I do this? Oh, that's a good idea. Or, nah, I don't know, There's always that back and forth.
Because he was great at digging under, the skin of the bad guys, and he would give people origin stories. He's the reason that Mr. Freeze became a great character.
Paul wrote the first one. It was just terrific, that Heart of Ice.
One of the most powerful scripts that we had.
It was really dark. It was probably darker than anything and more tragic than anything that had come before, but it was well written. It had heart to it.
Very moving and very touching, and really showed the depth of the potential of those characters.
And Freeze is a really interesting villain too, because he's a sympathetic villain.
Get out! Get out!
Nora! Nora! My God.
It had a lot of action, but it wasn't violent.
It's my concern now.
Since you ally yourself with my enemies, you leave me no choice.
It was more fantastical because you had the Freeze weaponry. It's not gunplay, it's not bullets.
I put Mr. Freeze at the bottom of the pile because, Mr. Freeze. I mean, I want to read a Joker story. I want to read, what's Catwoman got to offer? I finally got to this last script, which was Heart of Ice. And I'm like, okay, well, let's read the Mr. Freeze script. As soon as I'm finished reading it, I call my then writing partner, Marty Eisenberg, who was working at Fox Kids.
As a receptionist at the same time as writing on Batman, I had access to everything that was coming in.
He was the reason I was able to get the scripts, because the two of us were trying to pitch for the series, which was never going to happen because we were comedy writers. We had done Beetlejuice. The Batman folks weren't going to want to know from us.
I would see the storyboards for my episodes when they came in, and I'd, bring out the Xerox and I'd bring a copy to Bob. So
I call it Marty and I'm like, who's Paul Dini?
I don't know who this guy Paul Dini is, but he's got it.
He's the writer who can write the most amazing Tiny Toons and then turn around and write the most amazing Batmans.
This is the mix. This is what it needs to be.
This guy's amazing.
How did he do that? He made it look so damn simple. How can we do that?
Then they had a sample script, which was Pretty Poison. And I believe Tom wrote that with Paul.
And it starts with Harvey Dent and the gal who will become Poison Ivy having dinner.
And it was such a terrific script.
And that's another thing I loved about it was Harvey Dent is the DA for quite a while.
The continuity is wonderful.
Harvey Dent's talking about his pal, Bruce Wayne, and Bruce is supposed to join them for dinner. And where is he? And oh, he's probably home napping. We cut to these shots of Batman having this horrible fight on a rooftop with a terrible thug. And then we go back to the dinner and says, well, what kind of guy is he? Well, he's kind of boring. And then we cut back to Batman. That little cinematic intercut sequence, I was very happy with that.
When I read it, immediately I go, oh, I get this. I get how this works.
Randy was just starting on the show, and he read that script and he said, I finally got the show when I saw that sequence. I said, oh, we're making little movies. And he said, yeah, that's the idea.
Batman was almost an incidental figure moving through three other people's story.
It was written as a show about teamwork, about Bullock not wanting to play with the other cops.
Hey, I'll tell you who's to blame. Batman.
You saw the Batman too?
Come on, Harvey. Batman's fault?
Then whose fault is it, officer?
I don't know, but I'm sure it wasn't Batman.
The way the script was originally written, it was a flashback to his childhood. He's been taught as a child not to follow others and to take and to lead and to charge and to not work with others. And this was this entire 5-minute insert. And while he's being interrogated, where he's remembering this, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Because Kevin's just like, boom, out this goes. We can't do this. We don't have time for it.
Either you start coming up with some answers or hand over your badges.
The lieutenant, the guy who's causing all the trouble, who's like, one of you is lying. I wanted him to be the bad guy. So that's kind of why that design was there. And it's like, when he comes out of the shadows, it would be revealed that it's him.
It would have fit the whole POV motif. Well, it turns out there's no way that they could do that back then, because part of the edict for Saturday morning was that we could never show a police officer in a bad light. That was one of our rules.
The collar belongs to all three of us. It was a team effort.
Gee, thanks, partner.
Yeah, look.
What was that, Bullock?
I said, thanks a lot, Montoya.
And yet, the show came out pretty good, regardless of those issues.
Perchance to Dream, where Batman goes into his childhood and deals with Thomas Wayne, his father.
What they did with me is they had an idea that they couldn't whip for whatever reason. So they said, let's get Lansdale. I think this is in his wheelhouse. So I got a pages and it says, we want a story about the Mad Hatter, Bruce Wayne is double life. It was very general. And so then I would sit down and start playing with it till I made a script out of the idea.
Son, you sound upset. Is something the matter?
No, it's impossible. No. It can't be you. It can't be.
That's the only one that I ever did like that. And that was Michael Reeves' idea.
If you watch It's Never Too Late, and then turn off that and go get a copy of Angels with Dirty Faces, you'll see that I didn't have a lot of creativity in my story, because it's very similar to Angels with Dirty Faces. It's sort of a tribute to that. It kind of showed that we could do these sort of semi-serious stories that didn't have a flashy villain, but still had some meaning.
If you want to know who Batman is, watch the end of his Silicon Soul, where this robot who, for all intent and purposes, has become Batman, realizes he has taken a life and takes his own life in return and sacrifices himself to save the world, because he cannot allow himself to take people's lives, and he cannot allow the world to suffer because of him.
No!
My people. What have I done?
One of the things from Bruce to Eric to to Alan Burnett, I just said before, even before I was hired, he said, just promise me that when Ra's al Ghul shows up, I get to do him.
That was a conversation that happened, and Kevin, again, did it justice. I think he was in his glory making that.
Ever since I was 13, and I first read the Ra's al Ghul stories in the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams comics. I don't know why it was that. Maybe that was the first time that you really saw a globe-trotting Batman. I don't know why, but it was like the love interest of Talia was another thing about it. I just wanted to do that as a cartoon from when I was 13. Bruce, and with the blessing of Alan Burnett, Bruce and I came up with like a different concept. We said, what would we want to do, And everyone says, oh, it's a Spielberg movie. And it's like, no, it's not a Spielberg movie. It's a Hammer film. And then we said, oh, yeah, and if it's a Hammer film, what would they do with the mummy? It's like, well, you have the Christopher Lee style mummy. Oh, no, it's beautiful Nefertiti pharaoh, which is actually this hideous creature that sucks your soul out of your face. It's, we just made it into a Hammer film. And so that opening, there was no script for it. That was pretty much us pitching to Mike Goguen, because Mike Goguen drew that. That's the reason why we did it specifically, so that there is no dialogue necessary. And Talia is pretty much his soulmate.
I have to go after him, Talia. Will you help me?
You are so like him, making me choose between the two of you. Oh, beloved, why has he forsaken me? Does he think I've betrayed him?
I can't pretend to know what Ra's thinks, Talia. The only thing he and I have ever agreed upon is our feelings towards you.
He talks about his feelings for her, and he really does have them.
But some of the poses of Ra's al Ghul, heavy shoulders and the look, that was, and to this day, is a Kevin stance. That's the way, when Kevin wants to be Kevin, he will stand with that proud sort of Greek god / Superman attitude. And it's just natural to Kevin.
What makes Batman different from the villains that he fights? What is it that makes Batman Batman and not the person that people seem to think Batman is? Lockup initially came from Paul Dini. He came up with the idea for the character.
I wasn't even going back to crime this time. I just had to get away from him.
Okay, imagine if you could find somebody who could actually keep people locked away in Arkham Asylum. But imagine if he was crazier than they were and Batman had to take him down.
You should all be locked up in a cage without a key!
I'm all about this. This is great. This is fantastic. And what's brilliant in the episode, it's utterly brilliant, is that the character designers put him in Batman's colors. Everything he's wearing is blue and gray and black with just a little yellow in it. And it completely emulates Batman's costume, and it's completely subtle. Like, I didn't realize it until like the second time I watched the episode, and I'm like, oh my God, look what they did here. This is brilliant. He's Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. And there's a gag in it where he's watching a TV, and he just pushes it over, and that comes right from Taxi Driver.
I've seen how you treat your prisoners. Forgotten and scared. Without hope or compassion.
Can it be you actually care for those creatures? You're just as crazy as they are.
They had done an incredible set of storyboards, and it all paid off with this final scene in Arkham Asylum. And Dan Reba went back and reboarded it. Like, it was really, really good, but he went home and he's like, I know how to make this better.
I wanted to really nail that idea of him being that locked up in that little slot that's fuming, and I really wanted to evoke that mask that he's wearing, and I wanted to make sure that worked right. And we weren't doing animatics back then. We had to really read it in the board and kind of guesstimate what this is going to feel like, and it was all like stopwatched and old school.
Harvey. No.
You know, Harvey Dent wasn't who he was except for this tragic accident. You know, he was in love with somebody, he was a good guy, he was a DA.
Alan Burnett and Randy Rogel's script for Two-Face Part 1 and 2 was pretty tight.
It's like one of those really good scripts that you don't have to do anything to.
We got to see Two-Face as a really sophisticated character.
Harvey Dent.
No! Keep away! Leave me alone!
Alan liked the way I wrote, and he liked the stories I came up with. So he said to me, I'll tell you what, youngster, I'll give you a shot. Here's what we're going to do. I have already written the outline to a Two-Face episode, which I want to do. I was going to write the script. Why don't I let you write the script? Because I got a whole bunch of other things to do, and we'll bring you on and we'll try you out. And if you screw this up, then I'll have to, rewrite the script, right? And so I really paid attention to it and worked hard on it. And when I came in, he says, this is terrific. This is great.
Harvey, what happened?
Because it was Two-Face, it was a two-parter, So I went back to Alan. And I said, I think he remembers this too, because it went into production and people were liking it. I said, do you have an idea for the second one? No, actually, I don't. I said, well, I do. He said, what is it? So I told him this idea. He goes, no, I really hate that. I said, well, how about this? And I had another idea. He went, well, now that I like. And that's when he said, I'll tell you what, how would you like me to bring you on staff? I go, oh, I would love that.
I mean, the thing that made the climax fight scene of Two-Face Part 2 was the emotional part of it.
And remember, he flips the coin and Batman turns over all the coins that lands. They can't find the coin. Alan said, oh, that's a good idea.
The fact that Batman was seriously injured during the whole fight scene, and I got to use that in the action blocking.
And usually they come up with just a much easier way to do it. I would sometimes call a shot in it where they think, oh, the camera would be better over here, or so.
And they allowed me to make, as much as possible, every composition symmetrical, either diagonally symmetrical or cut in half. They were all symmetrical. It was all black against white.
Poor Harvey. So filled with anger. Do you think there's any hope?
Where there's love, there's hope, Commissioner. But a little luck wouldn't hurt. For you, Harvey.
The fact of the matter is we each have an almost Gotham Batman story. I know mine's the best, but let's hear yours anyway.
The only thing that we did that didn't get made was that me and Michael Reeves and maybe Paul Dini, I don't remember for sure, we put together a thing called Batman Escapes, I think it was, and it was a series of Batman episode. Well, it was one episode, but a series of events within the episode where he was trying to escape from all these traps. And we wrote this proposal for. I said, "Damn, this is wonderful. This one's gonna be there." No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I think we all. I know Michael and I. We felt confident, man. We were already saying this is gonna look great on the screen. We're gonna cash that check. But we got paid for the idea and for coming up with it, but they ended up not using it. And I think it was a mistake. I think it was a really good episode.
There's a story that I wrote, a script called The One and Only Gun Story.
I remember it well.
Yeah, we thought we were going to do it. We liked it.
Batman is in the city facing off against criminals, and you see a gun, a pistol, and it comes out of the corner and it clicks and the bullet starts to move in slow motion. We dissolve back to a point where many years back, iron is mined and smelted and turned into a metal that can be used in the manufacturing of guns. We go to that factory, we see the gun being manufactured, and we see it getting sold at a gun store, see it getting taken home and put in a drawer, and then, that family moves and they're having a yard sale and they sell the gun, and the gun winds up ultimately in the hands of a criminal. And finally, this gun is used in a robbery, and it is the weapon that kills Bruce Wayne's parents. Ultimately, Batman saves a kid from using this gun for some horrible purpose and saves the kid's life, melts down the gun and puts a brand new plaque on his parents' grave, to memorialize them many years after they died. Everyone loved it, thought it was powerful, and the network just said, we don't want to get letters.
Fox was bold, but they weren't that bold.
Maybe that's a little too far. Maybe that's a little more than we want to tackle.
I remember I had this really cool shot where Batman is poised on a gargoyle on top of, this huge building. And I did like this helicopter shot where it went all around him with the city all around him as you would see it, before. And Alan looked at me, he said, "You realize that shot will cost $1 million, right?" I said, "Why?" He said, "Because they draw these things in 2 dimensions. So that's an animating background. They have to do every one of those back." Oh, yeah. Now with CGI, of course, they can build that into the computer.
When you're writing screenplays, you're supposed to write them in master scene. You don't talk about what you cut to. You don't talk about camera angles. You don't talk about how the camera moves. You don't say pan to and on this and blah, blah, blah. If you do that, it is the sign of an amateur. If you don't do that in animation, you haven't done your job.
Printout comes out of the printer. Batman looks at it and he rubs the back of his neck. Now, you normally wouldn't tell an actor to rub the back of his neck, but it gives the guy a thing like he's kind of like confused as to what's going on here. So those are the kind of things you would lace in there.
When you write in animation, you get to live the dream of directing from the page.
The first 2 looked exactly like I imagined. The third almost. And well, they were really pretty good to me. They didn't mess with my stuff much.
That's exactly what I asked for. That's exactly what I wanted. And it's like Christmas. And what's better is when you ask for something and they give you more.
When you would run into problems, like this script has too much, there's too many pages, or there is too much dialogue, or just what can be animated, with the limited budget that you have. You always have to fix that in storyboard.
The dialogue is sacrosanct. You don't mess with the dialogue, but you can change staging directions as necessary.
When you're writing Batman, you were writing a little feature film, and we like to keep it cinematic and very visual.
At one time, probably about 70 artists in different capacities.
I mean, just terrific storyboard artists and funny guys too. By the way, you never want to piss off a storyboard artist or a animator, because when you come into work the next day, there'll be a picture of you on the billboard with a big hippo butt or something like that.
When I finally got to work on the Batman animated cartoon show, the character Batman was the least interesting thing about the series to me. What I liked was everyone else. What I liked was the background designs. What I liked was it was staged in this weird kind of like 30s, 90s conglomerate, and that we got to do film noir.
I mean, there is a certain amount of film noir that we all were looking for, but each director has his own influences or her own influences. Each artist brings their own thing to it.
I've loved film noir since I was a teenager. When I was in college, I made a little film noir animated piece. So I've always really enjoyed the Bogart mystique, the detective stuff, the shadows, the dark.
It had the stylistic aspect to it. Everything with the whole dark deco look.
That was Eric Radomski and Bruce. I embraced it wholeheartedly because I think it was a perfect way to go, and I think it's where Batman lives, in the shadows.
Alfred Hitchcock, especially the Alfred Hitchcock from the 30s and 40s, is what we were going for.
It was Miyazaki, it was Hitchcock, it was Walt Disney. Those were my favorite directors.
Using black as your ally and as something evocative, that's an individual choice.
And so if we look at On Leather Wings, you'll notice that there's like a shadow over the screen a lot of the times to create that sort of noir thing. And a lot of times that's something that I think that the cameraman is adding that shadow to the shot. It wasn't something that an animator did or that a storyboard artist did. They actually added that. They knew that the show needed to be dark and it actually felt noir.
Of course, every episode is all black. It's like black is ubiquitous for Batman.
Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski both felt really motivated to work on this. They both did beautiful design work. Eric came up with the whole concept of starting with black paper and bringing the buildings and the light and the skyline out of the black. Bruce Timm came up with just gorgeous character designs, elegant and simple enough to animate, but complicated enough to be really interesting.
There were no stray lines. I mean, Bruce's design sensibility was the absolute minimum amount of lines on characters that had to animate because they would have to be animated.
It's almost minimalist. It's very spare and at the same time extraordinarily effective.
The animation was a hallmark of that series, just groundbreaking, just really helped define it.
They were able to do incredible magic tricks, like make a series look like it was the 1940s and today at the very same moment.
I think the look was so distinct, sort of timeless in a way. That's what's helped it maintain its its leverage within the world.
So people are driving cars that are from the 1940s, people are wearing clothes from the 1940s, but they're also using computers. And it doesn't feel jarring, and at no point do you go, what the hell year is this supposed to be?
They look like an alternate universe that the Shadow would have lived in.
That first crew, we all were on the same page as far as style, what we wanted.
So I got to do background designs, character designs. They had me doing layouts. It was great. Kevin had me doing special effects background, like a speedboat on the water. I don't know how to do that. Oh yeah, you just look at it and do it. Okay. And so I did, and it was great.
We all bonded on our love for great artists like Jack Kirby and Alex Toth, especially Alex Toth.
We didn't have our sea legs that we developed later. It's like later on, we got into a groove, and later on, I mean, one of the things I did to sort of keep up with the artistic Joneses was I started, instead of drawing with pencil, I started inking my boards too.
If anyone wasn't a big Alex Toth fan, they sure didn't last very long.
The two things that had inspired us the most was Fleischer Superman and Miyazaki. Those are the two things that we analyzed like over and over again.
And we all were working with Japanese studios, and we were all just in love with the Fleischer brothers, and we studied it. We had like these really cheap tapes that you could only get bootleg tapes of the Fleischer brothers cartoons back then. They just were not available. And we watched them continuously trying to figure out how these guys did this and tried to apply it to Saturday morning animation.
Alex Toth, Fleischer Superman, and Miyazaki were our stylistic touchstones.
I wouldn't say it was anime style, but it's like what really influenced me in animation. Part of the reason I got into animation was just my love for Miyazaki.
And that was Kevin too. And it's sort of like, yeah, okay. Yeah, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna be the American Miyazaki.
And Archie comics, we all loved Dan DeCarlo.
Eddie Fitzgerald, it's like him and Kevin were the first people I met that made me think that it might be possible to do good, interesting work in animation.
The discussions that happened between us all, me, Bruce, Eric, Dan Reba, Brad Rader, these were kind of things that Dan and I and Brad had been discussing since we met in like 1984. I think it was 83, 84, when we all started working for Deke around the same time.
Well, of course it sucks. It's TV animation. What else could it possibly be? And they, Kevin, and then Kevin's friend Joe and Eddie Fitzgerald were like, oh, no. There's so much that can be done. They take, there's no money. That's not money. Look at the Japanese. They don't do those aren't high budgets. They got lower budgets than we do. We can do that.
I don't know of anybody else who's accomplished something, quite like that. It's really, really something.
I was in love with Japanese animation from when I was a kid. Astro Boy, all the Tezuka cartoons. Gigantor. I love Gigantor.
Beautifully cinematographed, and so it was what you could do with editing and camera work instead of actual drawing. And I found that profoundly influencing.
You get to the end, I go, oh, it's done by some other studio. And then you'd see another one where the animation was good again, and it'd be TMS. And then, and this was a running theme all the way through the 90s. You'd see stuff done by TMS, and it'd be of a very, very, very high quality, far beyond what would normally be expected of television animation.
There just weren't enough quality studios in Japan. We went to Korea. They were most known for assistant work and ink and paint, and they usually were subcontracted by Japanese studios.
And this was 91, so it was still when they were hand painting cells.
And people will say, well, you're just, ripping off Japanese animation and stuff. And it's like, well, you really didn't have a choice because the Japanese shortcuts were necessary because that's their style. And if you're using Japanese studios, you have to work with what you got.
They'd start an action, then they'd cut in on a close-up, do a slow slide of the character coming through frame with a swish pan BG, and then they do split screen, sometimes 3 screens, right? And they'd save on background painting by using lens flares to blow out the backgrounds.
The way that it was Americanized, the way that it was like an American product, is that the storyboards, the designs, the scripts, the voices, all of that's American.
The US would give project to Japan. Japan would do the storyboard or the key directing and key posing. They would subcontract to Korea. So they essentially trained the Koreans. Korea would turn their work back into Japan. Japan would return it to the US, and Japan would get all the credit. And they were really good at one thing, but they couldn't do everything. So you wouldn't see that until the work came back, and you're like, oh my God, they're not very good with assistant work. What are we going to do? And it was a big learning curve.
And we're talking 2D animation, so it's not digital. So it's actually layers of acetate. So you actually planned what was going to be on each layer of acetate.
I was very influenced by Eddie Fitzgerald's storyboard drawing philosophy, which is the less work, the better. It's not about drawing a pretty board. It's about communicating to the layout and the animators what they need to make this look good on screen. I do this sequence where they have to walk through this room to get the gun on the other side of the room, and then they're bombarded as they walk through. The thing that made it especially challenging was the ka-ching at the end of the whole sequence was Batman did it because he had his eyes closed the whole time. So how am I going to storyboard an action sequence where the hero has his eyes closed the whole time, but you don't know it till the end of the sequence? Are you kidding me? I mean, how am I going to do that? But then I thought of Hitchcock. I thought of how he used point of view. Do everything through Talia's point of view, so she's always looking at Batman from over his shoulder with his face turned away. It's exactly the kind of thing that Hitchcock would do, and it was perfect. It was like it had been written that way, but it wasn't written that way. It was up to me to do that, and I figured it out, and I was really proud of that. What was even cooler was when they come out to the other side, they're no longer in danger. Talia says, "How did you do that?" And I consciously cut on, how did you do cut that? Then we cut wide and they're safe. And I was like, it's so cool that they let me do that because nobody does. And then I watched it and they didn't do that. They didn't cut in the middle of the line of dialogue. They cut after the line of dialogue. And I was going, darn.
And then there was also broadcast standards and practices that would come after us if we did something kids could emulate.
We were dealing with the issue of guns and weapons and violence and how to create a drama without being irresponsible or overly violent.
Up until then, only ray guns were allowed.
Thanks to Avery, thanks to Margaret Lesh, everybody was understanding that this was going to be something very, very different.
If you want to have these superhero shows, you have to kind of respect what can and what shouldn't be done.
But we still want to have stakes.
Broadcast standards had not changed at all since I started working in Saturday morning animation or just animation.
We can't do anything that could be harmful to children.
They were on this one. They were very alert. This is the T-shirt. It's Batman basically strangling the Joker, and there's a nude woman down there, Catwoman.
Henry Gilroy made that T-shirt. Bruce did the drawing, and it was a gag drawing that he did for something. I don't know how Henry got a hold of it to do it, but it was some party or Christmas gift thing that he did, and he made a bunch for the crew.
And on the back is an inter-office memo from Fox to us. It says, Batman staff, subject, the artwork on the front of this T-shirt Breaking glass is an imitable act. Substitute styrofoam, cardboard, or some other non-poisonous, non-threatening material. Please change Batman's chokehold on the Joker. Perhaps he can grip his shoulder firmly, or some other generally accepted gentle means of restraint. Batman should be regretful about having to do it.
I still have mine. It's in the other room. I've never worn mine.
Anyway, it's notes like that. That's the kind of stuff we get from the network.
It isn't actually a real memo, but it is a list of things that we aren't allowed to do. All of those things are standards and practices, no-nos.
You couldn't talk about death.
A lot of children's shows have a lot of robots in them, so you can blow up a robot, but you can't kill someone.
No punches to the face.
You know, we could have somebody fall out of a helicopter, right? And fall, but you had to show them land in water or land in a nice bush or something like that.
You know, child endangerment, broken glass.
They wanted everyone to be safe all the time. It's like everybody had to wear a seatbelt everywhere. And if you're having a fight on a roof, I think they'd want you to wear a helmet.
Like that would send the kids into the hospital. They'd be traumatized. And it's like, no, we had that when we were kids and we survived.
We couldn't accommodate all their notes. We could not do that.
There's a lot of shows where we break through windows. It's how you show it.
They didn't interfere too much.
Fox let us have guns on the show, which nobody was allowed to shoot real guns.
The guns had to look like ridiculous.
There were certain rules on how the guns were used.
We were creating kind of a new language as far as what's acceptable.
Batman dodging bullets was never going to happen in the series, even though Batman is capable of doing that.
If there was a gun, it had to have a real great reason to be in the show.
So instead they used Dark Deco weapons, which were the same weapons, but not described in a way that would get them flagged.
But they're clearly recognizable weapons.
Thank God the bad guys in Batman the first season were such lousy shots. They couldn't hit nothing.
No one betrays the society.
The Shadow Society. Basically our version of Hydra. And we're all fans of Kirby. We're all thinking the same stuff. We're all on board. It's like they go and grab it. And it's like, may the shadows live forever. And then, so Batman can't get any information out of them. That's all we had in the board. And then they said, no, they're going to think these guys are dead. And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't know. It says, yeah, make sure we see that their eyes are open. And Brad Rader drew it. And I'm like, that is 10 times worse. When he lifts it up and they're just blank eyed, it's like, holy crap, this is bad. But Broadcast Standard loved it. They thought that was a better answer.
That's exactly what happened. See, you're like, well, that's what you asked for.
Batman and the Mad Hatter are on a tower. And so the only way that Batman can prove to himself that it's a dream is he has to jump. And Michael and I were thought, oh, this is great. We're going to jump. And then Michael calls me up later and said, Joe, they're not buying it. I said, what do you mean? They're afraid kids will jump off. And I said, oh, that sucks. What do we do?
Imply the violence with shadow play, or don't show it. And it's actually, even more terrifying.
That way we got past the censors for it. And it actually came out, I think, cooler than we had done it the way we originally did it.
Bless Gene McCurdy and Tom Ruger, it's like they would back us up. But you would have, I would talk to Broadcast Standards, for instance, in On Leather Wings. Part of the reason why you got such a kick-ass fight was because it's a big monster. Man-Bat is a monster. He's a big flapping wing giant guy with fangs in his face. When Broadcast Standards would flag like, hey, he's punching him, and it's like, well, what else is Batman going to do? He's fighting a monster. And it's like, oh, yeah, I guess so. And then when Batman crashes with Man-Bat into that parking structure, they said, oh, you can't have blood. I mean, the first drawing, he was a mess. He was like really bleeding. But then we said, well, we'll pull it back, but we have to show injury because you can't demonstrate to kids that it's okay to go flying around and then slam into a wall and nothing's going to happen to you. We have to show consequences for physical action. And they were like, yeah, okay. When the guard gets tossed out of a window, why do you have to have him thrown through the window? He says, well, the monster jumps him. Everyone's going to think he's dead if he isn't tossed out that window. If he's in the room with this monster, we're going to think he's just dead. And they're like, oh, you're right. Just make sure that he lands, that we see that he lands and isn't killed. So I added an extra shot. of him falling into water. Of course, the water is like 10 stories down, and it's a sewer. It's like some runoff. So it's still impressive, but it answers BS&P's questions.
One of my favorite projects was Mask of the Phantasm. It's a great movie.
Phantasm was Alan Burnett's creation. He wanted to do like Batman Year One.
When we were tailing out of this 65, which was in those days considered the first season, it was determined we were going to do a long form, which was Mask of the Phantasm, and they were picking up 20 additional episodes. So at that point, we had 2 productions going.
Any of the stories that tell that genesis, that where Batman came from kind of story, are my favorites. And Mask of the Phantasm tells the whole thing.
And it started out as a direct-to-video.
Warner Brothers Home Video wanted something they could sell, something that could bring them in cash. And they said, let's do a Batman movie. The show's a hit.
People saw it, and I think we're going, well, let's give it a shot. I don't think it did very well.
Almost no marketing. That's one of the things Bob Daly and Terry Semmel told me when we made an Animaniacs feature film. You got $5 million you can lend me? I said, well, no, that's the minimum we need to put one out.
When we did the screening on the lot, Bob Daly came and Terry Semmel, they were the head of the studio. So I remember getting to talk to them about whether they would do a release. And he says, well, it's a gut check, because if you're going to release it, you're going to add a lot of money to advertising.
And then everyone liked it so much, once it was being put together, they said, let's rush this out into the movie theaters for a quick little legitimizing of it.
It was Warner Animation's first time out. It was Alan, and they decided it would be worth it to get it into theaters.
So we opened on Christmas Day, and I think it ran maybe 2 weeks.
I think I did. I think I actually went to some local theater to see what was there, and there weren't many people in the audience.
And again, it was animation on the level of television. Maybe like a $3 million budget.
It's prints, right? You got to put out a lot of prints back then. It wasn't just digital. That would cost a lot. And then, the posters.
So when you put that up on the big screen, trying to compare that to a Disney, animated feature that's $100 million.
Let me tell you, with the minimum, you don't get a lot of action.
Tim Sarnoff was there then, and Tim was sort of my second in command. He dealt with all the money issues, thank God. He got Silicon Graphics to donate to us a whole bunch of computers. And this was way back in the day. I mean, nobody was really doing computer animation then. He set up where we built Gotham City, what you see behind me, in the computer. And so you could move around within the city. And that was a big deal at the time. That was something different.
The idea that they divided up all the directors into little sections, and we all kind of had our own parts that we did.
And so we went to the local theater, and it was filled with kids my kids' age and their fathers, and I knew a lot of them, and it was like Fathers and Son Day at the movie.
It was like, hey kids, let's put on a show.
When you're doing Saturday morning animation, that's kind of what you dream of happening.
It's like a whole bunch of mafia gangster thugs are in a room, and Batman comes through the window and he picks up a table and smashes him over, and then he punches him in the face. It was a litany of everything they weren't allowed to do in the animated series on TV.
The only difference is now you had smoking and things like that, and you could really show blood. It was PG.
It was like they were ticking off boxes. It's like he comes through glass and he hits someone, and it was beautiful to watch it, because
it was just up a notch. There was actual death.
You're not watching TV now, kids.
Batman didn't cause any death, but the Phantasm definitely is a murderer. His ex-girlfriend.
He falls in love with Andrea Beaumont in the course of the movie.
It's based on Andrea Romano, because before each record, Kevin would do his mic test, and he would go, oh, Andrea. And he would just like this gushing romantic voice, and he was just like melt her, If every record he would start this way. And that was like our tradition. So Alan just thought, okay, this love interest has to be called Andrea, so we can hear him say that. It's for real. And everyone else gets to hear him say this.
Life isn't about vengeance. Life isn't about living vowed to dead parents. It's about love. It's about sharing love with people. So he goes back to his parents' grave and he asks them to please release him from this vow.
know I made a promise, but I didn't see this coming. I didn't count on being happy.
He has this revelation.
You are now. I'm changing the plan.
And at that moment, a flock of bats comes screaming out of the earth, and they pull him back down to his fate. And he realizes he can't escape his fate. It's really like a Greek tragedy. It's a classic Greek tragedy. But that scene at the grave where he's talking to his parents, I was alone in the recording studio when I was doing it. And I opened myself up emotionally. And I was, in my mind, I just went to a place that was a very painful place in my childhood, where I was at my father's bed when he was close to death. And I was trying to reason with him. And I was speaking to him, and he was unconscious. Because he was a very, very hard man. He was a cruel man, and he was an alcoholic. And at this moment when he was so close to death, I was pleading with him why he had to be the person he was. And I was 15, 16, and I just went there. I don't know why I went there. I just went there. And I played the scene, but in my mind, I was there in that hospital room, and I lost it. And after the recording, Andrea said, "Cut, that's it, perfect, no more takes, Kevin, perfect." And she came in and she put her arms around me and she held me and she said, "Are you okay? I don't know where you just went, but it was perfect for us. But are you okay?" It was a wonderful moment that I had with Andrea, because we really understood each other. We spoke to each other really well, and she saw what I was doing with the role. And she saw that this had gotten very personal. So I think acting, the more personal it gets, the better it is. But the more personal it gets, the more exposed you are. And if people reject that, it's very painful.
I wrote and produced with Boyd Kirkland a Batman movie called Sub-Zero. Schwarzenegger had been signed to do this. He was a big star. And so they said, "We want Mr. Freeze to be the villain of the animated one." That's how it happened. So I sat down with Boyd, and we had to throw out Bane and completely reconceive the story. And that's how Sub-Zero came about.
She's got a couple of weeks at best.
What?
Don't shoot the messenger, Victor. I'm just telling you like it is. Nothing can save her now short of an organ transplant.
Then do it.
When the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie came out, that was directed by Joel Schumacher. It was, the vibe on it was not good. And the studio was getting very nervous. And that's when I got a call, because they were going to release both of them at the same time. Well, they called me with a lot, me and Boyd, and they said, they're getting nervous. The feeling is not good on this movie.
I won't leave without you. Go. We're running out of time.
Ours got pushed back like 10 months, I remember, the release date of it. But when it came out, it did very well. And I remember when Siskel and Ebert reviewed it, Ebert said, "The live action movie is a cartoon, and the cartoon is a live action movie." And he really went on and on about it. So when I saw him, I said, "Well, thank you for the," and he said, "Yeah, animation is really growing up. You're seeing animation have really darker themes and can tell bigger stories and all that." I was particularly proud of Sub-Zero because of how we fleshed out Robin and Barbara's characters.
I remember the day Jean called me up, she was so excited about the music.
God bless the music department at Warner Brothers. Doug Frank and Gary Lamel were running the department then.
The music itself by Shirley Walker. We had an orchestra for every episode. The whole episode. It wasn't like we were, let's take a piece of music that Shirley wrote last week and plop it in here. She was writing a new score for each episode.
It was really a blast. I loved doing it, and I loved working with Shirley.
Oh, I loved Shirley.
Oh, God. Now you're going to make me cry.
She was the nicest person. Shirley Walker was so wonderful and so humble and so incredibly talented.
She was amazing. She was just, it's, looking back on it now too, there she was, a woman in very much a man's milieu.
Shirley was like, she was part of the team, the theme and all that. you heard it and you just went, oh my God, it's fantastic.
I think when I saw the main title with Shirley's music, I said, this is why we're doing this show.
Everything was hand copied. All the music was, you'd have to get it to the copyist and they have to write out all the parts for the third clarinet and the second horn. I mean, everyone had a part.
You know, I was involved in all the steps. We approved the voices, we approved the music, but how could you not approve that music? It was a slam dunk.
Powerful in her talent. I mean, she was so strong.
And those players are among the best in the world, you know, that play in these orchestras. They can sight read music and it'll sound like they've rehearsed it and been playing it for weeks.
We had proven ourselves with Tiny Toons. We had spent a lot of money on the music and it had paid off. So, okay, we're going to do that with Batman.
Warner Brothers changed all of that. Original scores were being done.
When nobody was doing that. And I was like, I don't think we can do that.
It gave so much more production value and human subtlety.
So then when it came around to Batman, it was kind of like, well, this is what we do now. This is, you know, we have full orchestras like everybody does. And they were like, oh, okay.
If I was working on an episode, she'd just sit there and talk with you, have a conference.
She looked like your Sunday school teacher. And she had so much going on in there. It was crazy.
It wasn't just based on timbre or musical technique or physical aspects of the instruments, but the fact that she knows how people think when they're playing their instrument. There's subtle things in her orchestration that were based on human behavior and the human mind that are a little cut above the way most people think.
She worked in this sort of dark genre. You know, I mean, she started out with Danny Elfman. It's like, woo.
Shirley Walker was already on board and had already created what we, Bruce and I, Alan, wanted for the show. But we had to take that to Danny for his blessings, as it were. And he wrote his piece, Shirley orchestrated it and performed it. That is the Batman main title that you hear.
We actually thought that you could probably make some of these episodes without any dialogue, so that they would really play around the world. You wouldn't have to know any particular language, and just tell really great visual stories, very cinematic.
But the music can pull us into to more specificity of emotion and detail, action. So it was great. I think Shirley probably fought for that as she fought for many things, and it was greatly to the benefit of the show.
Deep freeze, for instance. The freeze robots come out of the ocean, come out of Gotham Bay and go walking up to the prison, bust through the walls, all that stuff. Music, 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 music. But then you cut inside of his cell and I go, then no music. They're like, what are you talking about? The music box. Until the explosion sets the snow globe off, then music. You want to hear that snow globe. And Shirley's like, yes, exactly.
I think that she also fought to have a staff of composers at the beginning. I think that she wanted to include different approaches, different people. And I think it was interesting because I think everyone brought a little different angle to it.
When I did Sub-Zero, I talked to Shirley. I said, Shirley, I want you to score it for us. And she said, well, Randy, I will do it for you, but I'm busy on these other projects, so I won't be able to give you my undivided attention. I said, Shirley, I want your undivided attention. I need your undivided attention. She said, I know. So here's what we're going to do. She says, I have a guy who works for me named Michael McQuiston, and he's terrific. And so we brought Michael in. He showed me a couple of cues. We started going, and very quickly, I just said, I have no notes for you, Michael. Just go do what you're doing. Just keep doing what you're doing. And he did. And he really stepped up. But I think after when we premiered it on the lot and Shirley was there, I smiled at him. She said, "Did I tell you, huh? I told you."
There's all this world of writing and creating that goes on. And then they bring in the actors like a herd of cattle to give it voice, you know.
We have our part of the world and they have theirs.
We are the last people involved.
I said I do my best work when I'm lost or when I'm just having too much fun to pay attention to directions.
I remember the feeling of joy after every single session.
I show up like a kid who's thrilled to be given a chance to play in the sandbox with the best.
It ain't just a paycheck. They're into the character.
I love doing voiceovers, and I believe firmly in giving the client who has hired me the very best product that I can.
I've always found it very liberating.
You don't have to memorize it. You don't have to do blocking, you know.
When you're not aware of people looking at you, when you don't have to have that physicality.
I would leave there with a high that was just purely spontaneous and natural, because wonderful scripts, marvelous actors, great people to work with, wonderful direction by Andrea.
One of the nice things was we didn't record alone. It was a gathering.
And you're in a room with all the, Bruce and everybody decides which take is the right one and this and that. And you're there in case you want to, they want to know, gee, how close are the characters? Is the helicopter going to affect their voices? Should they be yelling?
So I didn't understand when I first started that I would be in the room with those other people doing a radio play.
And now we bring you to Mary Worth as she turns the corner and says to Sally, you're doing that kind of drama.
The joy of doing it in the round with everybody there in the studio instead of, just having to do one line.
Hollywood's a small community. Word got out in the business that there were these incredible bookings going on at Warner Brothers, these incredible 2-hour recordings where you saw amazing performances out of people. And Andrea said she could get any actor in LA she wanted in there.
I love line readings. I'm one of these people who will sit down and go, wait a minute, show me what you want. I see what's going on, but what are you really looking for? I love hearing it. Then I could do that or something like it, or my version, I love drawing within the lines when it comes to acting.
Andrea was doing her homework every show, getting up at 4 a.m, going over the show and every line, trying to figure all that stuff out so that when we do a read through, she would go over it like a radio show, but she would explain to the actors then, this is this, this is this, this is this.
But they know that if they give the line reading to the actor, it's always going to sound like the actor was imitating somebody. You know what I mean? You want it to sound organic. So the way you get them there is by guiding them emotionally to what would lead the character to say it the way they want to.
The joy was we were all actors. We could inhabit our characters and look at each other, and that we would feed off that. It was perfect.
We take our inspiration from our colleagues, and everybody has something to offer.
Well, the ones that are the most fun to record are the ones you get to work with the most interesting actors.
I always loved, walking out into the studio and finding out who was there that day.
Ron Perlman, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr.
Mary Kay Bergman.
And Bob Hastings, of course, was so good.
That's guys from this show, and that guy's from that, ladies from that show.
I mean, everybody who was in the show was just an incredible cast.
Those with evil hearts, beware, for out of the darkness comes the Gray Ghost.
I like that I insisted having Adam West come in and do the voice of the Gray Ghost as young Bruce Wayne's childhood hero.
Oh, God, what a wonderful man. There was a great moment, though, in this Salt Lake City airport. You run into people at the weirdest places when you're actors because you're always crisscrossing. I ran into him at the Salt Lake City airport, and we're sitting there, sharing coffee at the airport, and these people, wait a minute, it's Batman and Batman. So all these people started wanting to take their pictures with us. It was a great moment.
Well, if it isn't the Dark Knight himself.
The really good idea for this whole show is Bruce Timm being the toy villain because Bruce's office is packed with toys. And then I knew that Bruce and I both loved the Batman show when we were kids, and Adam West was sort of our hero. And I said, and we have to get Adam West to play Bruce Timm's hero.
Oh, that was, again, one of those dream come trues that couldn't believe he's in the room.
He was an echo of a lost Hollywood, a gentler time when people were respectful and gentlemanly. He was just such a wonderful, classy guy who had such respect for actors and writers and the whole creative process, and couldn't have been kinder. You know, he could have come in with a lot of attitude. You know, wait a minute, I was the real Batman, you know. But he didn't. I approached him with a certain degree of trepidation the day he came in to do The Gray Ghost. And I said, God, I grew up with you. I'm a fan of your work. You know, I feel like I'm treading on your territory. And he said, oh my God. He said, it's yours now. Run with it. Have fun with it. It's such a great character to play.
And again, another opportunity where he could have been insulted by the fact that he was playing sort of a caricature of, you know, a guy whose career was waning and, you know, from a kid's show, et cetera. He was nothing but professional. And he did a brilliant job. He was really good.
So when you're dealing with those kind of actors, it just makes you better.
You know, as a kid, I used to watch it with my father. The Gray Ghost was my hero. Really? And he still is.
The best part of what we do for a living is we don't have to give up our fan card.
But we were all very tuned into each other.
And Warner Brothers, especially with Andrea Romano, always wanted to have the full cast together.
Andrea Romano is really the best in the business. So you really don't presume to direct voices. You sit in a room, you let her do her job. She asks you questions.
That all came together beautifully. Andrea Romano was able to cast so many great actors in so many different roles for that show. She did an incredible job.
Which is really complicated in Hollywood because everyone has such difficult schedules, different shooting schedules. And you record an episode of a show like this in 2 hours. Well, you can't get everyone to find the same 2 hours in a week.
And there was something about what she brought to that direction. It let down the drawbridge, I think, for all of us.
She, you know, the casting director often is also like a screening agent. They know who works well together, you know, and they don't want to hire people who aren't going to work well together. So she tends to hire people, for one thing, with some theater background.
Most of my career has been theater and voiceovers.
Those people tend to be a little more collaborative.
I mean, and I think she's beloved by the talent, which certainly helps.
It's beyond just a respect for a working relationship. She felt like family.
Andrea and Bruce Timm and Eric Rogomsky, all the creators, knew that the kind of performances you get out of people is just different when all the actors are there together.
I used to believe Batman was responsible for you people. But now I see nearly everyone here would have ended up exactly the same, Batman or not.
I like to play the bad guys as being people who have something within them that is lost, that they know is lost. They ignore that it's lost. And eventually they come to actually regret that it's lost.
I think what's unique to the series is we saw the pain that created the villain.
That's these guys.
All the villains took turns. They'd feature one villain in the one episode and then another villain. And there was a rotating group of us, about 7 of us or something.
She is Poison Ivy.
Thank you, Dr. Isley.
Diana's she's just like a lot of fun to be around. And she's just like a really good friend.
No, I mean, I did think about the strength of her. I mean, Pamela Isley she's a PhD and she's strong and she's assertive. She's very assertive.
For all the edge, there was a sadness in his heart. You know, if he had a heart, there was sadness in it.
So I would think vocally, how do I place this? Where in my register? What attitude do I have and stuff? And then you sort of create a character in your head.
We saw in the backstories and the like, they led us into that place, you know, where we see why hurt people hurt people.
You said it yourself. That fat bird would never get invited to a party like this. Not with those clothes, that waddle, those flippers.
Oswald! Did she mention my fine Roman nose?
But the people who have the best of intentions, which are not for the best for everybody, have the best of intentions for themselves.
And this is a situation where my seeking out the inner life of this character was really pretty easy. I had, first of all, enjoyed the character in different formats, you know, with Burgess and with Danny.
However distorted her thinking was, she had decided it was her job to save the planet from the destruction being done to all the vegetation. That was her through line.
I was always kind of surprised by the content of the dialogue and the situations because they were very human. They were very human, especially I thought for the Penguin being self-obsessed.
I didn't look at Betty Page or any of that stuff, but I felt sensual while I was doing her. I felt sensual, and I felt like a brain when I was doing Pamela Isley, and I just inhabited that.
I think you saw an inner life that was broken and explained a lot of their mistreatment of the world around them to balance out the way they had been mistreated.
They called her an eco-terrorist. She was for the right thing. It was good stuff, but excuse me, I'll have to kill you now because you're not letting me get away with it.
It's just the darndest thing. I have this natural immunity against poisons, toxins, the pain and suffering of others. Go figure. Bye.
And the character of Bruce Wayne in Batman, he's the most raw emotionally. He is an open wound.
Batman is who Bruce Wayne is. That's him. That's his voice, that deep voice.
Sometimes, old friend, I wonder if I'm really doing any good out there.
When you approach it from that way, the voice that you use as Batman, that husky, dark place that he goes, doesn't sound artificial. It sounds organic.
He has a beautiful voice, and you can tell somebody who has taken his craft seriously.
He's the richest guy in Gotham. He's the most eligible playboy. Everyone knows this man.
In the movies, he has so many girlfriends. And it's like, oh, come on. How are they not going to know who this guy is?
And I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if Bruce Wayne was so distinct from Batman that no one would suspect him? What if I said, could I play with like sarcasm, humor?
I actually did check this against any musical sounds. Computer still can't come close to pinpointing it.
Wayne Manor, one moment, please. A call for Master Bruce from a Dr. March.
Hey, what's up, Doc?
They loved it. And the early episodes, there's a lot more of that. As the show evolved and it became apparent how dark it was going to be, Bruce felt that the lightness of Bruce Wayne, there was a lot of irony and humor in the early Bruce Wayne. He asked me to tone it down. He said, we like the distinction, we still like the idea, but it doesn't fit in the dark noir Gotham City that we created. So tone him down.
What is amazing is the fans.
I had no idea I had a fan base. None whatsoever.
And you don't really know how it's affecting people until sometimes years later.
I have to say, it was like somebody telling you a joke and you walk halfway across the room before you get it. Oh, and then you hit the floor.
When you're the voice of a character, you give it your heart, you give it everything, but you send the performance out into the ether and you don't get that feedback that you do on stage. And I was originally a stage actor. Half the reason I became an actor was because of that communication with the audience.
So when I was asked to do Comic-Cons, I said, why? And they said, because you will meet your fans and make some money. And I went, okay.
Also, I'm a bit of a recluse. And so it wasn't until I began doing conventions that people began bringing me action figures of Langstrom and Man-Bat. And then I began to understand that it had had an impact.
Getting to know a lot of the actors now at the cons that we didn't have time. We didn't socialize. We didn't do cast parties. So that's very precious to me that I've gotten to be much more friends with, Lauren Lester, I knew already, but he was about the only one. I've gotten close friendship with John Glover and with Kevin. And, it's been wonderful.
The world can be rough. It's a brutal, difficult place, especially for a lot of kids. And for a lot of them, a lot of people, the safe space is often an animated character.
And a lot of what I get at the cons is women that were young when they watched the cartoons coming up to me and saying that I changed their lives because they'd never seen a strong woman in a cartoon before. And they'd also never seen a woman who told women men do not get to abuse them. There's some pretty heavy stuff that can go on at cons, conversations, tears.
Hearing stories from people who would come up and just say, You have no idea what you did for me. I had a really rough childhood, and Batman was there for me. Batman was my safe space. Batman was my guardian.
It was kind of nice to meet people who told you that that was something iconic.
I guess I kind of owe it to you, Batman. You probably saved my life. I bet you hear this all the time. Look, I'm gonna miss my bus. I'll see you around. And thanks.
Hey, Batman, you stink so bad, I can smell you from here. Pew. Pew, pew, pew.
The Joker's nuts.
I don't know that we really knew what we wanted the Joker to be, other than we didn't want it to be a Jack Nicholson impersonation.
Justice is served hot, Batman. You're gonna melt just like a grilled cheese sandwich.
When he came in, it was like, yeah, sure, let's see what that could be like. So Tim came with a natural, theatrical sort of presence to his delivery, which was something we definitely wanted. We didn't want the Joker to be a bumbling, goofy idiot. He had to have some class to him. And then the dark side was completely second nature to Tim. And almost to the point of, like, I don't want to be alone with this guy because he's really creepy.
He was Joker, like terrifying and lock up the children and don't let them watch.
Oh, that's a joke, right? Batman finally told a joke.
Tim was just like a little bit like a horror movie.
Just for that, Batman.
We kind of knew we were in the zone, but I don't think we fully, knew the balance of what that character should be.
Service with a smile.
But Tim Curry was wonderful. Tim Curry was crazy, scary. And Mark was crazy, funny, and scary.
Mark did make it his own. It's like, but that first show, and first couple, he's kind of like doing his take on what Tim had done.
Mark found the humor and the absurdity in the character. And that brought a whole different color to it.
I'm certainly a better dresser.
I thought, Luke Skywalker? I don't get this. And then I watched what Mark did, and I realized there's a madman inside Mark Hamill.
Him holding back his madness, so he would deliver it very intellectually, but it was on the verge of wanting to destroy who was ever in his path. But that was from the audition.
But as he grew older, he grew into who he really is. And he's a character actor. He is insane to be in a booth with. He is so talented.
He nailed it from the audition. And we were just like, that's the Joker.
They replace actors for all kinds of reasons.
Batman, you wouldn't let me fry, would you?
You never know why someone's being replaced. I worked with wonderful actors, and I've never understood why they were replaced. Tim was one of those situations. I thought he was fantastic. I love him as an actor.
It definitely had the menace that we wanted. I can't say that we were completely satisfied with it, but that had less to do with whether we thought Tim was delivering or we didn't really fully understand what we wanted yet.
Paul Dini comes into my office, which he would do once in a while. And, we just shoot the crap, and just talk about what we're going to do. And one time Paul came in and he says, you know what? Remember Cesar Romero in the Batman series in the 60s? He always had a girl in the gang. I think the Joker needs a girlfriend. And then he's gone. And next thing you know, Harley Quinn is written into the series.
Paul Dini created Harley Quinn. He created her.
Comedy comes to her so easy. And yet comedy and Jeopardy, that's like a unbeatable combination. And she's the perfect character for that.
Talk about grasping at straws. Oh well, at least I'm going out on a joke.
She starts off as this therapist and ends up being, you know, very easily manipulated. That's right out of Paul's wheelhouse.
And then he created this monster. She ended up, you know, taking off, and she's this major character now.
Because it didn't have that stink of, oh, we've got to make a bunch of money on this and it's going to be a great tool. It was just a purely good idea that had an appropriate place.
She's kind of like Wolverine. They introduced Wolverine in the X-Men comic, and suddenly, like, he just exploded and took over their universe.
I think what happened is Paul came up with a preliminary design, but Bruce took it and really made her who she is, because Bruce is a freaking genius, you know.
But that was the birth of Harley Quinn, was really because Paul wanted to do a role for Arlene.
Arlene Sorkin's performance, it's like you just can't get enough of it.
She's a wonderful actress, and she was a friend of his, and he had great admiration for her, and he wanted to create a character for Arlene Sorkin. So it was tailor-made for Arlene. She was fantastic.
We worked like improv people. I mean, it was, we really connected, and we are now later really close friends.
And her voice is inside my head. You know, when you're reading a word balloon, I just hear Arlene, you just know how she's going to say the line.
Look alive, wage slaves, presenting that caliph of clowns, that mogul of mountebanks, the one and only Joker!
The banter, the playing off of each other.
Let's face it, she was hung up on Joker.
Harley just evolved, and then in Harley's Holiday, totally on her own. I mean, she held her own easily.
And she is now the most cosplay character.
The most famous character that people want me to draw at conventions and stuff for commissions. Her and the Joker.
And my attitude toward Harley was sort of amused, the character. She was sort of amused by her, but then she had to set her straight. So she was, all of a sudden, Poison Ivy was the straight man, and Harley was the crazy one.
I remember when I would go driving like this with Mr. J. Mr. J, Mr. J.
Oh, change the record, Harl. You want to be some wacko's victim the rest of your life?
He created a classic character that will live on long after all of us are gone.
You really put the fun in Funeral.
I'm working on a story, Harley Quinn Black, White, and Red, right now with Paul Dini, written by Paul Dini, with Harley in Vegas, where Harley Quinn, you know, saves the day. So the only color is going to be red. That's really fun to work into the design too. And she's the leader of a gang, her own gang. Paul's scripts are just so much fun. It's like you don't have to think too hard about what Harley is going to look like when she says this line. And it works for comics and it works for animation too. I just love drawing Harley.
Call me.
Don't press your luck.
Batman the Animated Series was really unique. It's in a class of its own.
They took all the best stories, they took all the best villains, and they did them the best way possible.
We were in on a secret, and before it hit the air, it's like we knew what was coming.
It all worked so well. I mean, we were like basically pinching ourselves going, this is too good. When's it gonna stop?
Everyone had the sense that we were creating something new.
Everybody was putting in that little extra, Everybody was like, how do I plus this? How do I make this? And that's what the series is, one for the ages, It really is.
We kind of led the field in TV animation at that point.
This was a departure to do it on as a television series in animation. Right away you think, oh, it's going to be silly and cartoony. And they approached it with a completely different vision, not just visually, but story-wise too. And they pulled it off.
Wanting to do that show and then actually doing it at some point in my life. And actually doing it with a level of quality and on top of it. Thanks to Warner Brothers for, letting that happen.
And it's sustained for 30 years, and you can love it, you can hate it, you can criticize it. That's all fair game because it was allowed to become what it became.
Much of the time,
You think you have a winner and then you get disappointed, or you don't know if you have a winner and then you get surprised. But this was a wonderful feeling of riding on something that was just an example of excellence all the way across.
The ratings were good and they continued to be solid.
But the fact is that it's really enjoyable to watch the quality of the show and the way it's edited, the way it's been cut together, scored, the whole deal.
I do have good memories of that experience, and I think music holds a very special place with animation, and I have a lot of respect for the guys who are focused on that.
It's earned its place in television history because of it, in my opinion.
Because the characters are beloved, and because this series understood why they were beloved, and they were able to actually distill it and put it on the screen.
Everyone had enormous respect for the audience.
My biggest goal was to never disappoint the audience. I thought about what our kids wanted every day.
There was never a sense of doing a kid's show.
You know, I love all this stuff. I don't do this because it's just my job. I do it because I love it.
We had the creative teams. We had brilliant artists, brilliant writers.
Letting the creatives be creative is probably the best gift you can give them, and the best gift you can give yourself if you're the boss.
Create an environment which is good for them and healthy for them and supportive of them.
And some who I don't think had realized their own potential at the time.
I've been lucky. I've made some good decisions, but I've also had a great team of collaborators.
You know, there are hundreds of people that contribute to the success of these shows.
That's why you work with brilliant people. They take your stuff and make it even better.
There's nothing more fun than sitting around with a bunch of really talented, crazy people.
Well, I'm just really glad I got to do it.
You know, it was an honor just to be nominated. You know, it was an honor just to get the jacket, you know, and be worthy of it.
I was blessed enough to get to write 3 of them. I was supremely lucky.
I remember thinking how basic was my contribution, because when I saw the final product, how sophisticated it was, I remember being sort of awed by it.
What are the chances that that actor happened to be in LA that week and walked in for that role? I mean, that's bizarre that it even happened.
And you don't always have full control, and there are a lot of influences that come in to make decisions.
Companies tend not to take the time and energy and devote the funding needed to make such a show come to fruition.
Every department, every aspect of the production and the support, and our support at Fox of the show was tremendous.
Fox, who was dedicated to us, devoted to us, they wanted to have a hit series. They knew that pushing the envelope a little might bring in a bigger, wider, older audience.
Warner Brothers poured a ton of money into it, so the production values were fabulous.
They were in the $350,000, $400,000 range per half hour. So you're talking about $20 million, you know, of Warner Brothers committing to a series they had no idea was going to work 30 years ago.
The kind of dramatic animated series that everyone wants to make. Oh, we want to make it just like Batman the Animated Series, but it's tough to do it because you don't have the brilliant leaders that we had with Eric and Bruce.
People always say, oh, we had no idea that it would last this long. We didn't, but people are still talking about it now. I knew, and I said so. I said so in print, and this was while the show was still on the air. And I knew, because I knew what, you know, Johnny Quest meant to me. And I'm a Star Trek fan, for crying out loud. I knew that these shows would last.
When you have a show that looks that beautiful, when you have a show with stories that are that tight and that sharp, they're going to stand the test of time.
Working on that show was the right thing at the right time, for sure.
And, you know, after about 100 episodes, they said, okay, you know, Warner Brothers said, that's enough. We call it off.
I didn't understand why they stopped doing it. It was stopped when it was at its peak.
Well, they had other characters to promote. They had Superman, so they started making Superman episodes.
Batman the Animated Series became Batman and Robin, and that became Batman Beyond, and that became the Justice League, and that became the Arkham games, and then all the movies, The Killing Joke.
How many Batman shows have been done since then? They're still doing the movies and they're still doing television shows. So obviously there's an appetite for it in the general public, and not just for my generation, and yours, but future generations too.
It just went on and on and on and on and on for 30 years.
Everything we did back then is finding an audience 30 years later.
I loved Freakazoid, you know, I loved Tiny Toons. Animaniacs was brilliant.
But that show, that iconic Batman the Animated Series show, just imprinted itself on the brains, the minds, the visual memories of everyone that watched it.
That's a show that I think it makes a lot of sense to bring back.
A lot of those kids loved cartoons then and still love them and would love to see reruns of those Batman episodes or new ones, I suspect.
The fact that we got to do things that were so important to us made us make something that was important to other people. And I think that's part of why Batman the Animated Series is going to find new fans forever.
I loved doing that series. I did.
It was a party in some ways.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun.
You have to sort of guide it at certain points, but the basic thing is to let them be themselves. You get the best out of people when they're enthused.
It's one of the great moments in my life working on that series. There are a number of them, you know, getting married and your kids and all that. But that was one of the highlights because it was a trip back in time for me to go back to my origin. So that's my origin story. Like Batman has an origin story, I have one too.
You know, this wasn't a job for us. This was like a mission. This is why we were born.
It was like a dream come true.
You know, I think we were all naive enough to think we could do what we wanted. And so we did. And it worked out.
Everyone from the writers to the artists, to the producers, to the director, to the actors, everyone knew they were part of something special and had enormous respect for what we were creating. And I hope that people appreciate that.
I saw Alex Toth 2 days before he died, before he passed away. He was in a hospital room. What was Alex Toth doing? Drawing. And he had Fleischer Brothers cartoons on too. That's strange. He actually had Fleischer Supermans on this little TV in his hospital room, and he was drawing these elegant little, beautiful drawings. You know, right up to the very end. There is no ending for it. You know.
In fact, I remember talking to her about my symphonic work, and she wanted to see some of my scores, and she didn't flip through the score. I mean, she went through it page by page, and I could tell she was someone who could hear every note in her head when she's looking at an orchestral score, you know. So and she was fascinated by it and gave it the time of day.
I had the opportunity to work with Arthur Miller on the last play he did. So the lights would come up slowly on me, and I felt the warmth of the light as it came up on me. But what I was really feeling was the warmth of my blood rushing through my body. And I felt like I'd come home. I was transported. I had the most wonderful experience. I was back home.
Well, first of all, I'll tell you something they didn't like, and I did it. There's a character in the foreground, and Batman walking towards this character, and the character in the foreground is sort of getting his fist ready to, they're going to get into a fight, right? There's going to be a fight. And so I animated Batman walking towards the guy. Sort of he's coming towards cameras, and so on. Now, mind you, no animation had ever been done on this for this franchise yet. I'm taking it and I'm doing it the way I think it should be done, right? And I'm thinking Batman needs to look menacing, and there has to be weight. They just said they didn't like it. They didn't want Batman to move that way. I mean, I was quite happy with it. I thought, oh, that works.
One comic, I don't know who wrote it, I don't know who drew it, but there's a sequence where he's having a rooftop fight. He gets hit bad and he's like knocked off the edge of the roof, and kind of, his instinct is to grab for something, and he grabs onto this neon sign, this long sort of neon sign, like a theater sign that goes all the way down the side of the building. And he basically uses the breaking glass of the neon sign to slow down his fall so that, he can make it to the sidewalk alive. And then he spends the rest of the issue with his hands bandaged into fists. And I'm like, that is one tough ass superhero.
But my father was born in 1909 and my mother was born in 1914. They had been through the Great Depression and all that. So, they talked like people of a different era. They talked like the Old West. They talked like, 1930s and a little bit of the 40s. And the thing is that my grandmother saw the Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. She was born in the 1880s. And as a child, she saw it in one of its incarnations. I don't know which one. And she never forgot it. And then she saw, astronauts land on the moon. So I had all of this stuff from her. She came to Texas in a covered wagon. My wife's grandfather came to Texas in a covered wagon.
When I was at NBC and being promoted to director, they had a freeze on hiring. So I, instead of getting a manager of the department to replace myself, I talked Jean into doing it temporarily. So Jean worked as my manager for the department for several months. We got a temporary secretary. And of course, she did a spectacular job. So I took her to a Mexican restaurant one night and I loaded her with margaritas and got her to accept the position permanently because I was going to fight for that. She didn't want it. She just wanted to be a secretary. She didn't want the responsibility. Jean is so smart, but she didn't see her potential. It just wasn't a priority to her. And I don't think she thought it was a business she could succeed in. Can you believe that?
Every year, we used to have, it was great. We used to throw big parties on the lot, on the Warner Brothers lot for the new season. And had about 500 people, 600 people there. It was usually a big band, and it was great.
My first actual professional job was literally after graduating from college. I went on the road as a backup singer for Johnny Mathis. It was wonderful. It was a marvelous year, and I was on the road for a year, and then I was in New York and doing things, and it started my career, and I made my living as a singer for many years. So, and then the voiceovers took over after I started having children, and I needed to stay in the same place.
I went to the con, and at a dealer, they had all of the original Toth uninked pages to a Challengers of the Unknown story from the early 80s. And they were going for $200 a page, and I bought them all. And that was like my template for drawing how to pencil the comic book. And they had Toth's address stamped on the back of every page. And so I called up information and got his number and cold called him. And he was a fan of the series, and so we became best phone friends.
Bruce and I kept those drawings. He did them on 2 separate pages. And then we argued and said, okay, I want yours, or I want this one, you want that one. So we made copies back at the studio, and we gave each other the one we didn't have. So I have an original Tim Burton sketch.
Early on, Brad was corresponding, and I had told him that we were inspired by the Miyazaki film Castle Cagliostro, and I had it on Laserdisc. So I made a copy, and I got Toth's address from Brad, and I mailed him my copy, and I got a postcard back. And it was really cool because I'm like, oh my gosh, he's my hero. Wow, this is amazing. And he's like, I don't understand, what you guys did is so much better than this. And then he went on and goes, you guys did what we were hoping to do with Johnny Quest. And he went on and on and on, gushing about our show. And he had criticisms. Nothing's perfect. But the idea that he actually compared it favorably to Johnny Quest, going, you guys succeeded at what we were trying to do. And I
remember one time I got Kevin on something. What was it? Batman flies in the window of somebody, he's checking out, right, night, and they're not home. And then he's searching the place, right? But then he goes to hear something, so he goes out the front door. But the slide on the front door was locked. I said, "No, wait a minute." I said, "Kevin, how did the slide get out?" And the guy, he goes, "Oh, I'll fix that right now." And he did this with an eraser. Boom, boom, boom. He goes, "What else you got?"
They never, and I mean this, they never told me the budget of the show, ever. So I suspect Eric and Bruce and Al, they weren't being told the budget of the show. We weren't, none of us were keeping track of how much this guy was making, how much that guy was making, we were just making the show. And only late in the runs of some of these shows, like Hysteria, about 50 episodes into it, they came to me and they said, "Oh, we run out of money. We're not making any more of these." They never did that with Animaniacs or Tiny Toons or Batman. So apparently we made it for within the framework of the budget.
Well, there was a series produced down in Australia of the Beastmaster, and I have to say I think they did an excellent job with that. It's I went down there and directed an episode, and also I acted in I think about 6 of them as a kind of a mythic mentor to the younger Beastmaster, and so I mean they are. It's a durable product. It's a durable story. And again, it's one of those mythic stories like Batman. It's one of those things where the hero fights for the institutions of peace and continuance, and the raiders, the marauders, are the ones that are trying to tear it down.
And I go, you know what? It shouldn't be the Mad Hatter, because the Mad Hatter's a wimp, you know? It should be the Scarecrow, because the Scarecrow is the master of fear. And if the master of fear is afraid of this guy, oh my God, is he a force to be reckoned with? And Paul Dini's response was, "Yeah, but we really like working with Roddy McDowall." And I'm like, oh my God, I get to write for Roddy McDowall. I get to write for Roddy McDowall. Talk about a bucket list thing. And so I wrote this incredibly great, fun scene with the Mad Hatter, where he grabs Robin and says, "Beware the Jabberwock, my son!" And he's just losing it. And then they replaced him with the Scarecrow because he's the master of fear. Like, why did I win that argument? Why did I win that one? I could have written for Roddy McDowall.
I've met Danny a couple times through Michael Douglas. I think we went out. We went out to celebrate, I think it might have been Michael Douglas's wedding anniversary or birthday or something on a boat. And I remember the 2 things about that trip on the boat is Danny lying on the deck right up by the bow, going, "Whoa, what a great idea this was. Whoa." Just, but he's so brilliant.